From the WNIN Tri-State Public Media Center in downtown Evansville, I'm David James, and this is 2 Main Street. In this climate of finger-pointing, blame, and mistrust, we need to take a time out to smell the roses. So imagine our diverse society as a garden. Gardens need constant care. There are weeds, pests, poor soil. Challenges, yes, but the rewards are worth it. Radiant blooms, delicious fruits and vegetables, and knowing what can thrive from planting just a small seed. My guests are here to share their stories of how we can all grow good by cultivating caring communities. And we'll find out how our audience can plant their own seeds to make this a better place to live, work, and grow together. Bill Hemminger is a food pantry manager and former chair of the English department at the University of Evansville. He's the editor of a new publication, delayed by COVID-19, but now available, Growing Good, a Beginner's Guide to Cultivating Caring Communities. It's a collection of stories of regular folks who have rolled up their sleeves to make their community a better place. The book is published by Indiana University Press, and on the back cover, this message: Growing Good will help readers of all ages plant seeds of hope and cultivate communities where everyone thrives. Joining Bill is Dr. Chris Hoshwinder, who teaches biology at the University of Evansville. He has been researching evolutionary ecology for the past 25 years. He'll tell us about the native plant garden at U of E and other projects, both here and abroad. So, gentlemen, welcome to 2 Main Street after that lengthy intro. And Bill, let's start with you. Sure. And you call these essays a small chorus of those seeking justice for the society and the environment. Wow.
Yeah. That's true. That's a lot, but that is true. And there's so many. This is just a beginning. There are so many more examples of works like this, of activities, opportunities like this that are happening even here in Evansville, but certainly we chose the general Midwest as the target area for the book. But goodness, I mean, even in our town, this book could have been written totally from Evansville.
Mm-hmm. I know a lot of local people are
because they're the ones I know. Right, it's true. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So and there's so many wonderful. I mean, it's really uplifting to see the work that folks do and folks are doing. And there's always new ideas. And some of the ideas, my garden someday probably won't be there, and that's okay. It could be a natural kind of thing. I think his garden at UE shall stay there forever. But and some new idea will come up, some new project will come up, some new folks will come forward, and that's the way it should be.
Now, Chris, your essay in the book focuses on the native plant garden on the U of E campus. Tell us about that project.
So the native plant garden started in about 2010. And actually it stemmed from a project we were doing out on the Wabash River, trying to do restoration ecology and planting of native species out there and fighting the floods, right? So the way we've retooled the rivers, we have levees that block water, and so the places that aren't blocked flood very heavily in the springs. And we tried planting native plants out there a couple of years, and each year there would be this tremendous flood that would wash away all of the seed attempts that we had. So I thought, why not start a small local native plant garden, and that way we could have seed sources to pick up and haul out there, and at the same time we could have students spending time just outside the doors of the science building, seeing native plants, seeing the diversity of insects that come to them. And so for the last decade, we've been growing more than 100 species that have established in this little postage stamp of a garden.
Yeah. And you collect those seeds.
We collect those seeds. We have worked, Anna Jean Stratman at the time helped do a research project on milkweeds, and we collected seeds from those milkweeds and grew them with a change lab that she was orchestrating. And we grew those seeds and handed out native milkweed plants to people who wanted to help the monarch butterfly reproduce here in southern Indiana.
I understand the milkweed pods were collected by local students during World War II because they were used in life preservers. Thought that was very interesting.
Yeah, that is a really striking thing, how economical
Well, it
we
kinda
used to
makes
be
sense,
in that
yeah.
time.
The milkweed, who would have thought?
Yeah.
Now, also there was a UV campus has all kinds of interesting trees on campus too, and there was a large linden tree that was in the circle for
We
years.
lost that. Yeah.
What happened to that?
Well, that was just age, right?
Okay.
It was a beautiful tree, and it was a great place for families. And you probably took your family there as well,
Sure.
and let the kids play on the branches. And sadly, over time,
Well, they did their best, buildings and grounds or whatever you call them, to preserve that tree, to save it, lifting up the sagging limbs with stones, large stones, and so forth. They really did their
yeah,
best.
David Seller's always been
Yeah,
tremendous in
yeah,
that front
yeah,
garden and investing in it. And
What are some other interesting trees on campus?
well, there's a whole row along Rotherwood of different oak species that have been planted over the years, and most of those are really big, beautiful, mature trees now, from shingle oak to Shumard oak to northern red oak
Yeah.
and chinkapin oak. There's just all sorts of beautiful oak trees.
And there's I think it's dying, but a Royal Paulownia, right, in front of.
And again, see, this is the difference between Bill and I. He loves all plants. I only love the natives.
This is a great. Well, there's the biggest Royal Paulownias in front of the high school,
Memorial.
High School,
Yeah.
and it has these fantastic purple trumpets.
It is beautiful.
Oh,
It is a beautiful
But I think
tree.
it's dying on our campus or your campus. I'm retired. It's not mine.
Now let's learn more about my guests, Bill Hemminger and Chris Hoshwinder. Now, Chris, let's start with you. Where'd you grow up, Chris?
I grew up in northwest Iowa, and so for me, diversity was looking at things like soybean and corn. And, right, it was a pretty depauperate area. There literally was what was called the Conservation Park, which wasn't even 50 acres of replanted woods. So coming to Evansville, I feel very spoiled with the diversity we have here. To have an ancient forest 5 minutes away from the university in Wesselman Woods,
Wesselman Woods, fantastic.
just phenomenal.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I'm lucky to be here.
And of course, I forgot about this. The U of E campus also is home to a lot of squirrels too.
Well, naturally, so is the rest of the town. But
Yes.
anyway,
So, are they protected, the squirrels on campus, or are they just
They're-
run?
I think they need protection.
They're
I don't
certainly
know.
well fed, but what I like is that there are also flying squirrels. So the native flying squirrel is also on campus.
I did not know that.
And I wouldn't have known it either, except that Christy Hochwender, the good Dr. Hochwender, as most of us refer to her,
That's his wife, who's in the English department. Who was
Oh,
in my
okay,
department
okay.
she
years
was
ago.
The good doctor.
she
Yeah.
was working late
And
one
she saw
evening, and she and Tony Beavers saw this little rodent-like animal running around, and she caught it and put it in one of her purses and brought it home to me. And I was like, "Oh, this just must be a sugar glider or something." And it turned out to be our flying squirrel, which happens around here. So,
Wow.
so they're on our campus.
How did she capture this flying squirrel?
Honestly,
Oh,
I
she's
am very
inventive.
impressed with
Yeah,
with
yeah.
her somehow getting the squirrel into her purse.
You don't know the number of purses she's got, though. She just started throwing the purses at the thing, and one of them caught it. Who knows?
That's a story in itself,
Yeah,
how you
okay.
capture a flying
Yeah, I would
squirrel
think so.
with a purse. Okay, well, that's a good one. Okay, now, did you always like bugs and plants growing up, Chris?
I really did.
Mm-hmm.
I remember being 5 years old and, just from a working class family, and my mom and my brother and sister and I headed out for this month-long vacation in a station wagon, and we drove all over the West and saw Yellowstone and got out to Mount Hood, and when we got into California as part of the visit, saw all of this ocean invertebrate diversity. And that was, at 5 years old, is really when the light was turned on, and I figured I wanted to spend time seeing all the amazing things that are out there in the world, in the natural world.
Now, your specialty is restoration ecology. What exactly is that?
Well, it's really trying to work to reestablish what used to be in places. The best possibility is to have something like Wesselman Woods, where the natural system is still in place. But because of what we've done to prairies, to create farmlands, to eliminating forests to, again, either grow farmlands or maybe to build cities. We're actually in a place where we need to think about how do we replace those lost communities. And the way to do that is to think about the genetic diversity that comes with each species and bringing multiple species into the community, and then hoping and planning to start to reestablish the herbivores and then the predators of those herbivores.
Now, Bill, of course, Chris the Hawkeye, you grew up in Ohio, is that right?
Yeah.
I
didn't realize he was a Hawkeye.
We got a Hawkeye and a Buckeye.
Okay, I guess I'm a Buckeye.
Only because you're forcing us to be placed in
Now,
those ways.
and I read that you grew up in a log cabin like Abe Lincoln?
I didn't grow up in a log cabin.
Oh.
No, I grew up on a farm in west of Cleveland a little bit. But my wife and I, when we first got married, we lived in a log cabin in southeast Ohio. And it was it was 150 years old. It was kind of rough in a lot of ways, but it was absolutely beautiful.
So what motivated you to move into a log cabin?
It was beautiful, and I needed a place to be, and we could afford it, so we did. I moved out when I took this job, or a job at UE, because I had a PhD, and it doesn't go very far when you're in a log cabin. So I looked for a job, and I got one, but unfortunately it wasn't where we lived, so we had to move. But I do regret that, and if I read a poem today, one of it will be about that very precise thing.
Now, you're a former chair of the English department at
I
the University
am,
of Evansville.
yes.
I understand you've traveled to Africa on several occasions, even written a book called Africa Sun. What was that book about?
My experiences there. I've lived, in about half a dozen places in Africa, but I started as a Peace Corps volunteer in Senegal, which is West Africa, and it was it was very difficult in some ways. I came home weighing 110 pounds, but it was a great experience in so many other ways. So that just, kindled a desire to know more. And then later when I had a teaching job and so forth and I could apply for grants, I did several times, and actually won 4 Fulbrights to go to various African countries, both to teach and to do research. And ended up taking, 3 of them really. So then we spent a year. By that time, I was married, and then the first Fulbright I had, we brought our daughter along. She was 3 months old or something like that. We were in Madagascar, that crazy, wonderful, sad island. It's sad because so many terrible things have been happening lately. But we were in Madagascar for a while, came back. Then I got another Fulbright later in Cameroon, which is wonderfully beautiful and sad too. I mean, it's an African story. I mean, physically beautiful. The people are so generous, and the politics are so disgusting. I mean, it's such an African thing. But anyway, so we've had plenty of experiences in Africa.
And of course, you enjoyed the flora and fauna of these locations.
Oh man, yeah. But I loved it even in Senegal. Senegal, where I was, my village was on the Senegal River, and it's the Sahara Desert. I mean, it really was a desert. So we got maybe 9 inches, 8 inches of rain a year, and yet these people consider themselves farmers, agriculturalists. I don't know what we say in English, but which is kind of unfortunate because you had about 3 months to get your whole year's worth of stuff out of the ground. But I fell in love with the place, with the baobab trees, the ones with the giant swollen boles like this. So they're fantastic, and of course there isn't much else there, but it's so beautiful, so quiet. The stars at night, oh my God! I mean, there is no pollution. Well, there is when the Sahara decides to blow in your face, but because we get these horrible windstorms, But besides that, it was great.
Subsistence farmers?
Yeah, absolutely, sure. Now things are a little different now. 40 years ago. Oh, geez, almost 40 years ago. But they've dammed up the Senegal River, and the benefit of that is that they can irrigate, and so this entire area now is a whole lot greener. I've been back a couple of times over the years. Mm-hmm. So
now, tell us about. You're a food bank manager. What's that?
Well, not a food bank. I run the food pantry at Patchwork. Patchwork Central.
Yes.
Yeah, and one of the chapters here has to do with patchwork. And I was just at Tri-State Food Bank this morning. I used to be on the board there, but I'm not anymore. But in any case, I run the food pantry. So the food bank is the place in town that collects the food, as you know, and then it doles it out to us in the food pantries. And there's 7 in a consortium system, but there's about 25 other food pantries in the Evansville area. And it's kind of, and again, one of the first chapter in this book has to do with the food bank, the bigger place in Indianapolis. And John, the author of that one, runs this enormous operation. But I think here, it's something like here in Evansville. Glenn Roberts, sure.
Yeah.
Says it's about, I think it's like 10 million pounds a year. Is that right? Distributed?
It's incredible. They serve 33 counties.
Yeah, I know
in
that.
3 states, and they have this huge facility on Lynch Road now.
Yeah.
They moved from their smaller office really in the city to this
It's
facility out there.
Yeah.
And, of course, we talked to Glenn Roberts on this
sure you
program
did.
about food insecurity in this area. And it's incredible, like 1 in 8 adults in Indiana food insecure, and 1 in 6 children food insecure. Now, the community garden. Tell me about the community garden.
Well, okay. Now this is on land owned by UE, and now I guess it's about 10 years ago. There were 2 pieces of land, right alongside the Lloyd Expressway, and close to the soccer fields now.
Yeah.
Soccer fields, and behind the old armory.
Okay, Old National Guard Armory.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's what we called it. Anyway, so a couple of colleagues and I at the time, and this is about 10 years ago, said, geez, why can't we develop one of these hunks of land? They're about as big as a football field each. One of these, at least, as a garden. And I approached the president at the time. He said, sure. So anyway, this idea there was a morphing process at first. Some of us farmed our little plots, and we did that kind of thing, and that was more or less successful, I think less. And then we finally got to the idea of just doing one garden and everyone pitching in and being part of that, both part of the process of selecting seeds and but also then in planting together and weeding together and harvesting together. But together is a big thing. So the fact
Now,
that
Chris, do any of your students help with the community garden?
Oh, yeah.
So there have been people in the past from the department who've been interns and worked with Bill.
Yeah.
And
Well, his
also,
wife works with Bill.
Yeah, so again, the good Dr. Hochwender invests her summer with doing the food garden with
What about the
Bill.
harvest at the community garden?
Well, it comes, all along, so we put in potatoes. Well, they're ready soon, and beets and so forth are ready in June or even earlier than that. So there's an ongoing harvest, and there I have about 20 names on my email list of folks who are associated with the garden. So some are colleagues at the university, some are students at the university. I've had. What do you call it? An intern. The university has sponsored an intern every year except this past year and the year before. So up until recently, we've also had an intern, which has been great. There are some neighbors that help out. Among my other activities, I work with Aurora, which is works with the homeless in town. So we've had some homeless people come out there. I used to teach English as a second language, and we always had a class in the garden naming all the vegetables in English, of course. We're not going to do it in Espanol. But anyway, so that was another thing. Anyway, so lots of different folks come in and contribute. And the rule of thumb kind of is you take from the garden in proportion to what you think you have contributed. So, and no problem. And then there's still tons and tons of stuff left. So we have these little, there's a picture in the book is it in my chapter? It must be in my chapter. Well, of the good Dr. Hoshwinder and a great student at the time. A picture of them at one of the garden farmers markets, we call them. And where we those of us who participate in the garden gather a bunch of stuff up early in the morning, even with the dew on it. And well, now we do this at the garden site. We used to drag it all to campus. We didn't drag it, but it was kind of a pain to do all that. But anyway, we'd take it to campus and spread it out on big tables, and then folks, secretaries, administrative assistants, I guess, and other folks, colleagues and so forth could come and buy, and you'd walk away with a few dollars spent and a whole bunch of stuff. It was inexpensive. Yeah. And then there was still, and is still always, food left over. And that I would take either to the Patchwork Food Pantry or to St. Vincent, Sister Donna at St. Vincent, that food pantry. So nothing's wasted.
Growing good.
Yeah, man.
I like it, gentlemen.
Yeah, that's
so,
good.
just another way of talking about Bill's experience in Senegal, and that I've always been curious about, and that is because when I see what Bill does, I always see him working to draw community. So it doesn't matter whether it's with Casa or whether it's with the food garden or whether it's with patchwork. And I'm just really curious myself. What was Senegal like for community, and Cameroon for community, and how does that influence about community influence what you do?
Yeah, I just gave a big talk on community at USI the other day. Oh, sorry, I'm a little too far. Yeah, so I can say a few things about community, especially in Africa. So it was my wife and I, and first time around in the Madagascar, there was one kid. But the second time around, we had the two daughters. But as foreigners, and we were very foreign in a place like that, you are very dependent on. You have to be on everybody, and it didn't have to be a linguistic dependency, like you needed someone to translate. Often it was, but man, you need help of all kinds. So when our first daughter, this was 1988 when I got that Fulbright to Madagascar. I mean, this was her first year. We didn't know. My wife it was her first kid, so she's there going, my first kid. There's no one to talk to. I mean, she didn't have her sisters there. Her mom wasn't there. My sisters weren't there, and so on. So we had to depend, and we did, on good friends, and we had wonderful friends always. But for instance, I mean, this is going to be a little gross, but what do you do with diapers in a tropical country? Well, you don't. Well, in the first place, you need to have someone to wash them, hand washing everything. Well, you can't just hang your clothes up to dry because they'll develop bugs. All these bugs come, these nicely smelling things, and deposit their eggs in it. So even diapers have to be ironed after they are dried, okay? So we have to have someone to do that. Well, we have to know that you have to have that done, and then you have to have someone to do it. So that's just one of the things. In Cameroon, for instance, there are no roads. I mean, there's no road names. So to get around the city of 3 million people, how do you do that? Well, you depend on someone who knows where he's going, and which we did. And then there are no, Walmart. Well, there actually is something like that now. I'm not sure that's a good thing or not, but there's no single place to buy a bunch of stuff. So if you wanted like paper clips, well, there's some little guy down there who sells paper clips, so you have to know where he is. Well, we need what do you call them? Clothes hangers, Well, that's in some little shop in the back alley of some well, anyway. There's no way we're going to know where that is, Anyway, so we were very dependent on folks, and they were very helpful. But we made I think we made great connections. We still are in contact with folks from Madagascar, which is now 30 years ago. Our daughter's 33. And same thing with Cameroon.
Now, Chris, did you do any travels in your research?
I had a short stint in Ghana.
Ghana, yeah.
And found the people, as Bill described them, just really generous. People who saw that you were limited because as white, Eurocentric, fair-skinned, you really are limited in your abilities. And yet people treat you with generosity and kindness. And I think about being here in Southwest Indiana and hoping that we do the same sorts of things. And there are a couple of great chapters in Growing Good that sort of come back to that and talk about places where we can fit into community and serve folks who are from other places and help them with the challenges they face. Like the ones Bill is describing, it's just as alien for someone coming from a different country here and needing support and guidance and having a sense of where to find things.
So what did you study in Ghana? What were you
Actually,
investigating?
I was just teaching at middle school and high school.
Okay, I thought maybe you were studying some exotic plants there.
No, that was before my graduate experiences.
Okay. All right. We were talking off camera about invasive species. That's also a concern, isn't it, Chris?
Absolutely. Invasives are the other side of that coin, right? The head side of that coin are us trying to work to bring native species back into our area and promoting things like if we're planting trees to choose native oak species or native maple species. And the tail side of that coin are when we've chosen unwisely, like the Norway maple and the kinds of problems it has, or as you described it, the calorie pear, one of the most problematic tree species because it's so successful in spreading, even though it was deemed to be a seedless species when it was first promoted. But it helps us to recognize that we really need to be attentive to natives, because if we're not, there are already enough non-native plant species that some of them will continue to expand their ranges and be too successful.
Yeah. Can you say something, Chris, about the benefits of native species? And I'm thinking of insects, the attraction and so forth, because it's astonishing.
It is really striking. Yeah. I mentioned oaks because oak species can be host to hundreds of different species of insects. And each of those insects is a food resource for then the next trophic level up, which often includes bird species that would be feeding on them. And so if we have our native species, the food that are the insects on those trees then feed our native bird species, especially those migratory birds that are coming north in the springtime and moving back into the tropics in the fall. They need really large amounts of energy resource, and those insects provide that for them.
Mm-hmm. And I'm thinking of, am I right, the bush honeysuckle? Is that a Japanese honeysuckle
it
too?
Is.
Yeah, okay.
An invasive species?
Another invasive species.
Now I'm thinking of Ohio, though, because my brother-in-law has 5 acres, a nice space, and it had been a farm at some point. The entire, maybe 2 acres of his land, or when they bought it, they've been there about 5 or 7 years. But anyway, is covered with these bush honeysuckle. Nothing can grow there besides the bush honeysuckle, and it's apparently inedible. Although there are berries, but they're quite unpalatable even for birds and so forth. And did they poison the ground or something whereby nothing else is going to grow?
I think they're just more competitive.
They're
they out-compete everything else.
They really do.
But as Bill was describing it, most of the non-native species are not food resources. Neither the leaves for herbivores nor the flowers are typically accessible. And then for cultivated things that we think of as pretty flowers in our gardens, many times those the flowers have been selected to have a different look to them, which makes them inaccessible to bee pollinators. So there are many reasons to grow natives and to avoid non-natives. And the two most striking are, if you love anything wild, it's going to benefit by having wild plants as a resource. And if you want to avoid hurting things, then just don't bring in non-natives, because even if you think it's probably a safe species, it certainly isn't going to be doing much to feed our native species.
Yeah, it makes me feel bad about all the Nandina I have in my yard. Have you had Sharon Sorensen on this program?
No.
Oh, the great nature writer, a bird specialist in the area, but she hates Nandinas.
And understandably.
What is that?
It's a beautiful plant with bronze-colored leaves, and apparently the fruits are poisonous to a lot of birds.
Especially cedar waxwings.
Yes, but I justify their presence in my small yard by knowing that I have tons of other things, appropriate things for the birds to eat there.
It's the burden of knowledge.
That's true. Now, growing good not only involves community gardens and ecology, but also fostering a better living climate. Sure. Agencies doing good that featured in the book, which is Growing Good, a Beginner's Guide to Cultivating Caring Communities. Mm-hmm. Among them, Casa, Sister Joanna's House of Bread and Peace, and Patchwork Central, all great agencies.
And you're acquainted with them,
Yes, I am.
Yeah.
Are you a Casa volunteer,
yeah.
Bill?
Yes, I am. I have been for a number of years.
Tell us about Casa.
Yeah, this is interesting. Casa stands CASA, capital letters always, stands for Court Appointed Special Advocate. So when, this unfortunately often happens, a kid is separated from mom, dad, or both for whatever reason, and then the kid, probably because the kid is either neglected or abused, mom and dad are in prison or in some other place, and the kid goes someplace foster care or a treatment facility, a residential treatment facility. Anyway, mom and dad will eventually come up to court for various hearings, but no one's there. This is what they decided. No one is there in court to speak for the kid. And no one is there to really follow after the kid, too, to see what's going on, to meet with foster parents, to meet with, if there's a psychiatrist, meet with the psychiatrist. School, following after how the kid's doing in school. Oftentimes these poor kids are bounced around from place to place, and it would make it a challenge for anybody. So anyway, the Casa Volunteers, well, Casa is a group of specialists these are in town here, they're all women, and they train and then work with volunteers. That would be someone like me. And they accompany us always to court when we go. I've been to court about 6 times this year. It's been a little rough, but anyway, when we go to court, and they follow us there, and we always present a report. How's the kid doing? How many times have you talked to her, him or her, that kind of stuff. And you follow the kid along until something permanent happens, and often does within a year. But this case that I'm on now, I've been with this kid for 3.5 years. So that's a long time. And it's been a pretty tough road to hoe for him. Anyway, so I'm his voice in my own way.
Now, another essay in the book deals with standing up to super polluters, written by
Wendy Brethold.
Wendy, who is...
she's pretty well known here.
She's a firebrand,
yes,
definitely,
she's
and she is defending our environment, and I guess she's a champion of yours, Chris.
Well, how can you not love somebody who is working to reduce the amount of air pollution that we're exposed to? Yeah. If you think about one of the worst places to be in Indiana for air quality, it's right here in Evansville, and it's because we have a lot of coal-fired power plants that are releasing pollutants into the air. And it's not just carbon dioxide, right? That's about greenhouse gases. But really, pollutants that affect our respiratory system, from sulfur dioxide to carbon monoxide to, by releasing nitrogen oxides and having those react with oxygen in the air, ozone. And all of that damages our lungs. So if you have children and your children have challenges with asthma, it's really most likely because of all of the super polluters we have in the area. And then layered on top of that is also mercury emissions. And all of that mercury falls out and finds its way into our streams and rivers. And so anybody who is passionate enough to take hold and fight against these super polluters, who are the ones who are polluting at scales much larger than your typical coal-fired power plant, you have to love those people.
Of course, plants are our friends in the battle against these polluters.
I was going to say, though, the part of the problem is a physical one as well. We live in a river valley, and some of this stuff just hangs here. And just come by in July. Well, you live here, so do I, so does he. But anytime in July, August, I mean, it's kind of suffocating, you know. And actually, I guess, I may be wrong about this, I was about to say that the ozone, bad ozone days, actually that number has decreased. I think I'm right about that, but it still ain't good in this area. So no, it's a rough place.
So Wendy and John Blair, of course, another advocate to protect the air we breathe. Now, in the book, we talk about Patchwork Central, where you kind of manage the food pantry there. Yes. Calvin Kimbrough, the founder of Patchwork Central. I worked with Calvin Kimbrough at Channel 14. He was a photographer there, and we went on many stories together. Right. Calvin's a good guy, and he has some great photographs in the book, too. Yes. Of folks that he says these photographs are those created in the image of God, saying his images of men and women open doors into God's soul. All are deserving of housing, food, health care, and a living wage. And, of course, Patchwork Central is a place of refuge for people needing help. Yeah, well, when Calvin took those pictures, I believe he was living at the Open Door community in Atlanta. Same kind of thing, though. Where they would welcome and feed dozens, maybe hundreds of folks every day. And it was a residential place, unlike Patchwork. So Calvin and his wife Nelia lived there.
They live now in Nashville. But anyway, and he got to know, needless to say, whole bunches of people, and befriended many of them, but then took pictures of a lot of them too. Mm-hmm. And they brought doctors, and I remember I volunteered there sometimes over the years, but there's a regular foot clinic. Well, I guess most of us do recognize the value of having your feet treated if you have problems, but if you're on your feet all the time and you freeze because you're outside in cold weather and so forth, you probably have lots of foot problems. So they had a regular foot clinic. We were there for that day. So it was there's a lot of wonderful things were done there. Sadly, that place, the Open Door Community, is no longer there. Mm-hmm. The folks disbanded and so on, but a lot of good stuff.
All these essays in the book, any that really hit home to you guys? All of them probably did.
Yeah, kind of.
That's why they were chosen.
That's why they're there. I think it's the second one. I had to go back over this because it's been a while since I put it together. But the second one is written by a former student of mine, Shelley Daywig. And at the time, and this is a sad and interesting story, though, at the time she was working in Louisville. She still is in Louisville, working with Catholic Charities, the Refugee and Migrant Service or something like that, and worked directly with folks coming, resettlement, that's it, in this country. Owing to the policies of our previous president, her entire office was fired, and she lost her job, and there weren't so many folks coming into the community because our doors were closed, the U.S. doors, but that's not necessarily a good thing. One expects that things are opening up again, especially now with Afghan folks who are coming over, and there's always Iraqis who are coming over. So, but I'm not sure where she works now. But it's a beautiful chapter, I think, where she befriends a fellow from, I think it's Iraq. Mm-hmm. I don't even remember. So that's one I want to mention. And the very next one is another person from Louisville, whom I know from here, but he's in Louisville, and that's Kyle Kramer. And he works at the Passionist Center. It's a Catholic. It's like I can't think of. It's what do you do? It's I can't. Where you go and man, I'm not used to the vocab. Okay. That's a refuge in the city. Yeah. And he talks about that's the title of his thing, is Made for Belonging. He calls it a nonprofit interfaith spirituality center. And folks can come and stay there and work there as part of their treatment, if you will, and so forth. But he writes in this, Made for Belonging, and he has a garden project there too, that has invited in lots of Africans, actually, a lot of folks from overseas who happen to live in the Louisville area, and they can farm there for free, and the kind of community that is created both in the Interfaith Center but also in the outdoors of the Interfaith Center where they come together in the garden.
We're talking about growing good in your community, and you have something to add there, Chris?
I was just going to say that I really do like that title, Made for Belonging.
Oh, it's really nice.
I really think that all of us look for those places, right? I think probably WNIN is lucky to have you here because you were looking for that place of community for yourself, right? And
well, I enjoy sharing these stories.
Yeah.
I really do. Of all the good people around in this area, doing great things.
That's right.
They really
that's
are.
Right. No, that's
I
right.
know sometimes. Well, I was in the news business for so long, doing all those negative stories. So this is really a break.
It's a little
for me.
depressing after
It
a
is.
while. Yeah.
And going along with that, I really enjoyed the chapter on patchwork. And she talks about the parable of the rake. And she tells this story about somebody comes by and says, "Can I see the rake?" And he takes the rake and leaves. And she's wondering where that person is going with the rake, and is that rake gone forever? And will she be getting the rake back? And she sort of uses that as a metaphor for how, when we're looking for that place to belong and for that sense of community, we have to take those risks, right? That willingness to just let that rake go and expect that something good is going to happen from it. Yeah. And in that sense of looking for a place to belong, we need to do more than just say, what am I being fed? What am I being served? But really, how can I take a risk to provide something that might be beneficial in our community. And that's what I enjoy about these stories, are those examples where you can see how people have taken risks and how that can strengthen our community and give us places to belong.
Yeah, I could talk a long time about patchwork. I won't talk too long now about it, but I mean, it's been around since '77, which is when you knew Calvin Kimbrough and his wife were here as founders of the place. Well, I don't know if you remember Don Pitzer, but he was a sociology professor at USI, but his specialty was communities and communal studies. In fact, he really featured that in his work out at USI. Anyway, one time he came to Patchwork and was talking and said, you know, most communities like this, which are typically called intentional communities, we intend to be together. They may or may not have a religious element to them, but there's an intention. And yeah, that's the risk. We're intending to do something. We don't know what it's exactly going to be and how we're going to manage it, but here we go. But he said that the typical lifespan of such a group is about 2 years. Well, Patchwork has been there 44 years now. So, I mean, this is kind of a testimony to something in this town, I think, and something good in this town, in that well, one, there's been a steady stream of folks who are willing to, as you say, take this risk, you know. And at the same time, there's plenty to do. And, of course, the programs at Patchwork have changed over time. And I think with pride I can say it, that the first free clinic took place in a wing of the Patchwork building, and this would have been before Echo Clinics. Now, someone's going to correct me on this, but I think I'm right. Before there was an Echo Clinic, and I think there's now 2, and you know, full-time physicians, and that's right and wonderful. But it all started at Patchwork. I mean, and it got to be, you know, it was so tight with so many people running around, and there was so much need that I think folks who had more wherewithal said, well, let's maybe step aside and try to get a bigger place for this. But the point is that Patchwork was the place that it started.
And it was a seed, and it's
and
been
it was
growing.
a seed,
Yeah.
that's correct.
That's
and
what
it's a
you're talking
wonderful thing now, you know. So anyway, lots of programs like that have happened at Patchwork over the years.
My guests are Bill Hemminger and Chris Hochwender. We're talking about the new publication, Growing Good, a beginner's guide to cultivating caring communities. And we've been talking about the environment and climate change. Is that a concern, Chris?
It's certainly the largest concern for any ecologist in the world today. The bigger challenge is, how do we address climate change, and how do we get economic investment to reduce the amount of CO2 we put into the atmosphere. It's I think in some ways the biggest challenge with it is that we look 50 years down the road, when we have to really just start acknowledging we are that 50 years down the road already.
Yeah, I was going to say the last chapter in the book, The Sweet Spot of Climate Action, the author Jim Poyser in Indianapolis works with. I mean, his big thing is we need kids. We need to educate kids, but kids need to be part of the democratic process, the political process to get climate action happening. You know. And the stories are great, his working with kids. And I wanted to point out, too, I wanted to include the Earth Charter Indiana with this chapter, but it's not possible. But anyway, if folks want to look at something, you could look at the Earth Charter Indiana, which is part of the Earth Charter International. But there's a phalanx of people out there, professionals and all, who are working to work with kids or work with other groups to work with climate action, wherever they are. So it's a pretty neat thing. And his kids in Indianapolis to put together that straw bale of straws. I don't know if you saw the picture of it. I don't know if you did either. But we still get straws. I had to hand them back at the restaurant yesterday or wherever we were.
I do that too.
I said, don't just give these out. Most of us don't even want them anymore.
My wife and I, we just push them aside and say, take them back.
And it is a small thing, but it's not a small thing, you know. If you get a straw, if you're a seal or something, you get a straw stuck there, it could be the end for you or whatever creature it is. But plus there's all this plastic that's going to outlive, well, what? Even the bacteria in the world. So anyway.
Chris, doing the science part for us, also a PhD, a biology professor at U of E. He's been researching restoration ecology, repairing the damage done to our environment, And not an easy task, is it, Chris? I understand you've been collecting seeds, and you told us earlier about this research site along the Wabash River. What about that?
So Veteran Conservation Park is about 1,100 acres, and it is right along the Wabash River out in Gibson County. And so we have had several different big investments through summer research with students to try to reestablish some native plants in the area. At first, the targeted work was on trying to restore a wet meadow, but the floods just kept beating us back. Every year, it seemed like when we would put seed down, it would get washed away. So we started to try to do plugs of native meadow plants, and it fared a little bit better, but recently we've shifted just because of, financial constraints and a different strategy to try and get oak plantings out there. So my hope is, because there are some places where back in the day, Veteran planted rows of native trees on the site, we're trying to collect acorns and plug them back in that area to try to enhance the diversity. And given that oaks feed so many insects which feed birds, we thought that would be the best target group for us to replant.
Have you seen any eagles out there?
There are nesting
yeah.
eagles out on the end of the river there, and they're just stunning. Yeah, so it's really great to see how successful eagle reproduction has been in the last 20 years.
Yeah, tremendous. Yeah.
Also, the importance of pollinators. Tell me about that, Chris.
So in the native plant garden, where it is more of the focus is on the herbaceous plants, the things you might grow in a garden for showy flowers, the bees that can come even to this small place that is the courtyard in Cook Center, right? So this area is maybe 50 feet by 50 feet at the most, and half of that is concrete. And in that area, with the native plants that are in flower during the summer, we get all sorts of bees, from bumblebees to leaf-cutting bees, sweat bees. Yeah. And, we usually think of sweat bees in a negative connotation, but these are really great native pollinators. And just in Indiana, we have over 400 species of native bees. Wow. And somehow, we let the honeybee, which isn't native, sort of distract us from this incredible diversity of pollinators that do a lot of the work for us, right? We should be wanting to have more pollinators because they're providing these services of doing pollination even on some of the non-native farm crops that we have growing.
Yeah. Now, Bill, working in the garden inspired you to write a number of poems and also your travels in Africa as well. And some of those poems appear in the book. Yeah. And have you picked out one to read to us?
Yeah,
Bill?
Actually, I have. I have to find it first, though.
And you've also written some musical compositions, I understand.
Yeah.
So you are a Renaissance guy.
Well,
we have
whatever.
proclaimed you that.
Okay, thanks.
On 2 Main Street.
Here we go. Okay, then it's legit.
It is. All right, what do you got? What's the title here?
The title here is Sweet Potato, and I want to read this because we just dug sweet potatoes the other day. And this is at Patchwork again, so this is with the kids, because they have kids that come in the afternoon for what they call the children's programs. And I've done this for 100 years. I mean, well, maybe not quite, but a number of years.
You look good for 100.
Yeah, thanks a lot. But after the frosts come and, the garden is long gone, well, just before the frosts come, the sweet potato vines are just rampant. I mean, they're luxurious, and they have purple-green leaves. They're fantastic. And so you think, oh, heck, frost comes and it's all brown and dead. But of course, what you want is that fabulous, fruit underground, that tuber underground, which, as you know, although it can be white, and those are actually sweeter, but the big yellow, orangey ones, So that's what we plant. And for the kids, it's a big hit. And once I took a group of university students when I was teaching there to dig sweet potatoes, and it was a big deal. So so I was doing a little bit of study here on the sweet potato. Well, it's a natural source of phytoestrogen, right? estrogen, in other words, so you can get plant estrogen. And women, apparently, and particularly in the South where sweet potatoes do really well, would take lots of sweet potato, at menopause and other times of their lives. Anyway, so that's one of the stories here that comes out. But it is always exciting to just, the plants are dead in the sad-looking area, and then you start digging, and there's fantastic plants. So anyway, with no further ado, here's sweet potato. October, after heat and lack of rain. Soon evening vapor will collect and congeal cold on thirsty leaves at night, then explode in early icy light. White death in a garden of brown. To save itself, the sassafras dropped half its crop of leaves, sclerotic crisps. Lacking attractive dipping pools, bees buzz and strafe my sweaty head. Rampant on the crumbling floor, the sweet potato vines flow in green and purple waves. We lug shovels and spades, not worried we interrupt the purple growing. We know the swollen orange tubers wait, gravid there beneath the mantle. What Mississippi women took as antidote to aging before science made estrogen a fact of pharmacies. And though we have gone through this all before, each heft of the shovel that strikes sweet gold brings on a gasp and then applause. In 30 minutes, we've destroyed the purple world, but don't regret, since now we eye, amazed, the growing pile of suns whose energy is radiant now and stored for later. There's a sweet potato for you.
Sweet potato. So how can we grow good in our community? Well, Chris, what should we be planting in maybe our home gardens, and what should we be avoiding planting?
Well, we have mentioned some of the things to watch out for. There are some good community folks who help to organize sales of native plants. So I think maybe it would make sense to mention them at first.
Yeah.
The Indiana Native Plant Society here in the southwest corner of Indiana does a really great job of organizing 2 sales now, one in May and the other one I think in September, where they will, from their own native plants, grow some plants for sale that you can then put into your gardens. And they focus on only selling those native plants. And there's a part of that community that's also the Indiana Master Naturalist Group. So at that sale that they also have a big chunk of their plants that are just natives for people who are interested. For me, I'm a huge fan of anything milkweed related because all of those milkweeds will feed monarch butterflies. So especially the swamp milkweed in August, September, when the monarchs are migrating back south and laying their last batch of eggs, the leaves of the swamp milkweed are just about right for them to use for the caterpillars to feed on and be that last generation that flies south. So milkweeds I'm a big fan of. There are both rambunctious and tamer kinds of plants. Most of the plants that are native that grow in understory areas are pretty good bets for people who want tame plants. I think that the trilliums are just lovely. There are also bloodroot is a very beautiful, interesting plant. Wild ginger can be one of those things that doesn't get out of control as quickly. There are also some fabulous rambunctious things. If you have a big backyard and you want some plants that are mischievous, but you don't have to worry so much about growing them because they will certainly grow themselves. My favorite of those is the cup plant, which is Southwest Indiana's best silphium. It has these huge leaves that fuse together at the stem, and that's why it's called cup. It'll hold water in it. They will grow, the ones in the UE Native Plant Garden right now, some of them are over 9 feet tall.
Yeah.
They grow over 6 foot tall probably by the second year. And they have these big, bright yellow, sunflower-like flowers. And they do a wonderful job of recruiting goldfinches that love their big, meaty seeds. So that one's a winner if you have a yard where you want to have a bit of wildness to it. There are some that are
Say crossvine. Tell them about crossvine. No,
So-
this is beautiful.
It is a lovely plant. It is a somewhat tamer version of,
It's tame.
well, compared to trumpet vine.
Oh well, yeah.
So
man.
they're two of the three species
Yeah.
that come from the big known family, but crossvine just has these gorgeous orange flowers that bees love in May, and so
Yeah, it's
they're spectacular.
Beautiful pink orange. I mean,
Yeah.
beautiful.
And
flower.
so they really do a nice job of creating a wall. If you have a ugly old fence and you want something to grow on that fence, they can do a great job of that. But they are, again, one of those rambunctious native plants.
But no, trumpet vine also is native.
Native
correct?
as
So
well,
the
yeah.
all the
And
campuses
it's
are.
but I grew up with trumpet vine
Yeah,
in
no,
our
we all
yard,
do.
and so I'm always afraid of it. It's just even more aggressive than the best
Yeah,
aggressive.
it
native.
is aggressive.
But
I like the description of mischievous and tame.
Right.
So-
Plants. Well, you can watch the trumpet vine grow. If you don't move, you'll be sucked into it.
there
Yeah.
is another wonderful vining plant that's also somewhat aggressive, and it's the pipe vine. So
don't know.
Dutchman's pipe. Is
Oh,
sometimes-
really? That-
So there is a
Oh,
native
yeah,
there is a native Dutchman's pipe, and some of these species are really wonderful because they feed these specialized native butterflies. So for pipevine, the caterpillars of the pipevine swallowtail will feed on it and nothing else. So you really, if you want to get these big, beautiful, showy butterflies, you need the right plants that are their host plant for feeding on, right? And then they also need good plants for nectar, because the butterflies are going to need nectar when they're adults. So, yeah.
Well, here's a quote from the book, Growing Good. Anger and hopelessness can overwhelm communities, so what can everyday people do to actually grow some good in their own hometown? So, Bill, what's some advice to someone who wants to change our social climate for the better?
Well, I'd turn off the TV and probably the radio, and don't look at your computer for a long time. That'd be a first thing. And then get outside. Whether you're outside literally with Chris with his rambunctious plants, or you're at an agency in town, or you want to become a Casa Volunteer. I mean, there's only a giant list of things that you can do to get involved with other people, too. So you're actually dealing with them and talking to them. And it's amazing how some of those differences that seem so poignant and so trenchant when we're listening to the news and getting angry are really just not that big when you are working on something with somebody else. So
Get
that's
your
my
hands
first
dirty.
thing. Oh, definitely do that.
There you
Yeah,
go.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
if you're less social like I am, you can use native
What?
plants as your excuse for serving in the community by planting and growing them.
You can talk to
and then you can
rambunctious
just talk
plants.
to one or two people that come by at a time.
You know, you don't hear too many arguments among gardeners, do you? Or do you? I don't. Maybe they do argue about
I
things.
don't know. I don't know. I can't say that we've had too many in my years, but hey, I'm not the only one out there. So
Well, guys, some great advice, gentlemen. My guests have been Bill Hemminger, author and editor of Growing Good, a beginner's guide to cultivating caring communities, and Chris Hoshwinder, professor of biology at the University of Evansville. Thanks, guys, and keep growing good. We appreciate it.
all right.
Thank you, David.
Thank you very
Thank you.
much.
I'm David James. This is 2 Main Street, presented by Jeffrey Berger of Berger Wealth Services at Bayer Private Wealth Management.